All right, well, welcome everyone to Lunch and Learn series. In these sessions, we aim to bring you interesting and timely information, whether you are a volunteer, community sponsor, resettlement agency staff, a local advocate, or just someone who's interested in learning more. We hope that you enjoyed today's session, Managing the Housing Income Gap. Just a little bit about Refugee Welcome Collective. We collaborate with partners to provide in-depth training programs, weekly training sessions, resources, and on-demand technical assistance for sponsors, resettlement agency staff, refugees paired with sponsors, community and institutional partners, and others to support quality community sponsorship programs across the United States. Go to the next slide, please. Just as a reminder for everyone joining us today, everyone on the call is going to be muted. However, we're going to have a Q&A time in the end. We can all actually brainstorm the ideas. And there is the chat in the box. So if you have anything during the session, please feel free to put it in the chat. Following today's webinar, I will be sending out an email with a recording of the webinar. So feel free to share it with anyone that you think would be benefiting from it. Also, any resources that the presenter have shared with me, I will be sharing with you. So again, Lynette Perrell, who is the Senior Associate of Housing with Refugee Housing Solution, is our presenter for today. However, she can't join us. So we have a recording of the presentation, and I will take it from here to the presentation. So please enjoy.
Well, the objectives of this webinar is for you to understand the definition of what a non-citizen is, housing programs non-citizens do qualify for, the difference between what are considered restricted and unrestricted housing programs, and the common subsidies that are available to non-citizens. And we're going to do an overview of the continuum of care and what funding resources that non-citizens can qualify for. Non-citizen eligibility for federal housing programs vary based on the programs in question, the laws and regulations that govern them, the agency that administers them, and the immigration status of a non-citizen and the composition of the non-citizen's household. So, what is a non-citizen? HUD's definition of a non-citizen is a person who is neither a U.S. citizen nor a national of the United States. So now that we know how HUD defines a non-citizen, we can discuss what makes them eligible for certain federal housing assistance programs. I'm going to go over this again because it's so important. A non-citizen's eligibility for a federal housing program, it does vary. It varies based on the program they apply for, the laws and regulation that governs that program, and the agency that administers it. Also, their non-citizen status and the composition of their family and household affects their eligibility. Now, there are two primary laws that directly address non-citizens' eligibility for federal housing programs, and they are Section 214 of the Housing and Community Development Act of 1980 and Title IV of the Personal Responsibility Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act of 1996. Now, for this webinar, we're going to be focusing one specific one, and that be the Section 214 of the Housing and Community Development Act of 1980. So what is the Section 214 of the Housing and Community Development Act of 1980? Well, it is an act that prohibits HUD from making financial assistance and certain housing HUD programs available to persons other than United States citizens, nationals, or certain categories of eligible non-citizens. Section 214 of the Housing and Community Development Act of 1980 established the first federal restrictions on non-citizens' eligibility for federal housing programs. Now, the original restrictions, they were limited to non-immigrant students, but over time, the restrictions were expanded to additional categories of non-citizens. Now, currently, Section 214 states that only specific categories of non-citizens are eligible for benefits under certain housing programs. Those federal programs include public housing, the Housing Choice Voucher Program, formerly known as Section 8, Section 8 Project-Based Rental Assistance, Rural Rental Assistance, Section 502 Family Direct Loan, and Section 504 for very low income rural housing repair loan and grant programs. Now, for this webinar, I'm going to focus only on Section 214 largest subsidies, which are public housing, the Housing Choice Voucher Program, Section 8 Project-Based Rental Assistance, and the 4 major programs that are funded by the Continuum of Care. Now, we have to talk about the difference between what is considered restricted versus unrestricted. Now, restricted means that at least one person in the household must either be a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen to qualify for that program. Now, restricted programs can have different documentation requirements, and the immigrant composition of a household can affect how much housing subsidy they will receive in some of these restricted programs. Now, with unrestricted, it means that anyone can apply regardless of their immigration status. So let's talk a little bit more about restricted federal housing programs. Now, with restricted housing programs, the entire household may apply if one household member is a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen. Now, the eligible person may not have to be the head of the household, and it depends on the housing program. So each program is slightly different. Now, there is considered a thing called a mixed household. It is a household that includes members who are not citizens and do not have the appropriate immigration status to be eligible for assistance. So FYI, with a mixed house, they call it mixed households, HUD does prorate the assistance based on the number of eligible family members, not the total number of people in the household. I'm an example type of person. So for example, if there is a household of 4, and only 2 of them are citizens or eligible non-citizens, the subsidy will be reflected of a 2-person household and not a 4. And the reason why is because out of that 4, only 2 actually qualify for the subsidy. So the subsidy would be reflective of who's eligible. Now, here is a list of some restricted federal housing programs, and these are some of the largest ones. You have public housing for families, elders, and people with disabilities. You have the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program, Section 8 Moderate Rehabilitation Program, and most federal multifamily buildings, and federal first-time homebuyer programs. And this is just a chart that shows the immigration categories and the non-citizens that are eligible to apply for Section 214 covered programs. Everything you see in this presentation will be provided for you. However, if you do have questions about immigration categories, I will give you my information where you can set up a TA. And I also recommend that you contact your local HUD regional representative if there are some additional questions you have about immigration categories. Now let's talk about some unrestricted federal housing programs. As stated earlier, with unrestricted programs, regardless of a client's immigration status, they can apply for these programs and do not have to provide any documents or information regarding their immigration status. However, I want to add this caveat. Because these programs do not require citizenship documentation, they might need to provide some other type of alternative documentation may be required. So I just want to add that. And here is a list of a few of the federal housing programs that are considered unrestricted. The McKinney homeless programs, except for the McKinney's Section 8 moderate rehabilitation program, shelter plus care, supportive housing, home rental assistance, and low income housing tax credit properties. Now, depending on the state you live in, there may be additional housing programs that are available for clients to apply for, such as state public housing for elders and people with disabilities. I do recommend contacting your state housing finance agency for additional resources and programs. And this link will be available for you as well. Now, one of the things, there are some frequently asked questions from HUD, and one of them is, how will public housing authorities, especially if you have a client that's interested in applying for public housing or the Housing Choice Voucher Program, how do PHAs verify citizenship for a family with members who are refugees or parolees? And what type of documentations are PHAs allowed to accept? And this is HUD's overview answer to this. PHAs must continue to use the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service Systematic Alien Verification for Entitlements, which is known as the SAVE system, to verify applicant immigration status for any program that falls under Section 214, including public housing and housing choice voucher programs. Now, if you have any additional questions about documentation, I highly recommend you contact your local housing authority and speak to someone in the program to address what type of documentation is required to start the application process for both programs, for public housing and the housing choice voucher. So this is just an overview of HUD's response. Another frequently asked question is, can PHAs, public housing authorities, establish a preference for refugees and or parolees? And this is the PHA's response: yes. PHAs may establish a preference for refugees and parolees as long as they do not create preference based on national origin, since it is a protected class under the Fair Housing Act. PHAs may not set a preference for one specific immigration status that only applies to refugees or parolees from a particular country. Again, if you have additional questions about if there's any preferences in the housing authority's wait list in the application process, contact your local housing authority to ask if there's a preference, and if so, how do you assist a client in applying for the preference if it's available. Now, before I'm going to go into any specific housing programs eligible non-citizens qualify for, I think it's really important that we understand how subsidies can make housing affordable. So let's talk about affordability. Affordable housing, defined by the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, which is known as HUD, is a dwelling where a family or household can obtain housing, whether through renting or purchasing, and will not spend more than 30% of their gross household income. So FYI, gross income is income before taxes and deductions. So housing is affordable if an individual family is not spending more than 30% of their gross income on rental or mortgage payments. So here we go, because I like to use examples. And again, I'm using simple numbers for this scenario. Miss I need a home, monthly income is $100, and she is seeking an affordable unit. So for Miss I need a home to meet the affordability criteria, or in order for something to be affordable for her, her rent must not be more than $30 a month, because that is 30% of her income. So let's see how subsidy comes into play with affordability. So what is a subsidy? So if an individual or family receives a subsidy or lives in a project-based unit, they will not pay more than 30% of their income towards the rent. The subsidy will pay the remainder balance of the rent. So let's revisit Miss Ineta Home. Her income is still $100 per month, and she currently lives in a Section 8 project-based unit with her rent being $200 a month. Wait a minute. We determined in the first example that she can only afford $30 a month in rent. So how is this possible? Well, it's possible because with her unit having a subsidy tied to it, she still only pays $30 a month, which is 30% of her income, and the subsidy picks up the remaining balance, which is $170. So as you can see, without subsidies, sometimes affordability can be out of the reach for low-income families. So now we see the importance of trying to find a subsidy for a client, especially if they're low income. I'm going to go over the common housing subsidies that are available for eligible non-citizens, which are public housing, the Housing Choice Voucher Program, subsidized project-based Section 8, Section 8 moderate rehabilitation, single room occupancy, which is known as SROs, and low-income housing tax credit, LIHTC. So public housing, again, is restricted. Public housing programs, they are properties that are owned by government authorities and funded through HUD, but they are administered by a local public housing authority and available for low-income families and individuals whose household income is less than 80% of the area's median income, which stands for AMI. Another restricted program is the Housing Choice Voucher Program, formerly known as Section 8. It is like public housing. It too is funded through HUD. It's administered by a local housing authority and available for low-income families and individuals whose household income is less than 80% AMI. Now, the Housing Choice Voucher, it is the federal government's largest program that does assist the elderly, disabled, low-income families in securing housing in the private market. So that's key, private market. Since housing assistance is provided on behalf of the family or individual, participants can find their own housing, which can include single-family homes, townhomes, and apartments. Now, I want to add this to this. Now, with the Housing Choice Voucher Program, the subsidy is paid directly to the landlord or property manager by the housing authority on behalf of the participating family. Now, the family is responsible for paying the difference between the actual rent charged by the landlord. Now, under certain circumstances, if authorized by the housing authority, a family may use its voucher to purchase a modest home, which is the Housing Choice Voucher homeownership voucher. So we'll talk a little bit about that later in the webinar. Another restricted program is the project-based Section 8 housing. This is a government-funded program that provides rental housing to low-income households in privately owned and managed rental units. Now, with this program, I want to point this out because a lot of people get confused because they see the Section 8. Now, with this program, the subsidy stays with the unit. Unlike the Housing Choice Voucher Program, the subsidy is tied to the unit, not the individual. So let's back this up. Housing Choice Voucher, the subsidy is tied to the family as long as the family qualifies for the program income-wise. Project-based Section 8, the subsidy is tied to the unit. So that's the difference between these two programs. Now, an unrestricted program is the low-income housing tax credit property. It is an apartment complex or a housing project which is owned by a developer or a landlord who participates in the federal low-income housing tax credit program. Now, with this particular program, developers and landlords receive a tax credit by providing affordable housing to low-income tenants at a restricted rent amount. Now, I want to go over some different types of vouchers that eligible non-citizens can qualify for if funding is available. Now, housing vouchers, they are highly effective of reducing homelessness. They do create housing stability and contribute to lifting people out of poverty. Besides the one popular one everybody knows is the housing choice. There's other vouchers that are available to low-income individuals and families, such as the emergency voucher, the project-based voucher, NED, and housing choice home ownership vouchers. Now, with the Emergency Housing Voucher, EHV, this program is available through the American Rescue Plan Act. HUD is providing over 70,000 choice vouchers to local housing authorities to assist individuals and families who are homeless, at risk of homelessness, fleeing or attempted to flee, domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, human trafficking, and recently homeless or have a high risk of housing instability. I have provided a snapshot. It's a live snapshot of data. It's a dashboard that you can go to see how many emergency vouchers that are actually available through your housing authority. So this link will be provided for you as well. So if you have a curiosity of how many emergency vouchers are available in your area, you can go to this link above the snapshot, and it will I'll provide you with the information you need. So I want to talk about another voucher, which is the project-based vouchers. They're a component of the housing authorities. They're part of the Housing Choice Voucher Program. Housing authorities use it as a tenant-based voucher funded to allocate vouchers to project-based units within a project. Rental vouchers are tied to a specific number of units in a building. The assistance does stay with the unit after a tenant moves out. Another voucher that's available is called the NED. It's a housing voucher that enables non-elderly disabled families to lease affordable private housing of their choice. Now, with NED vouchers, also it does assist persons with disabilities who often face difficulties locating suitable, accessible housing in the private market. To qualify for this particular voucher, the head of household, spouse, or co-head must be under 62 with a disability. Another voucher I talked about a little bit earlier was a homeownership voucher. The Housing Choice Voucher Program provides vouchers to families admitted through the HCV program to purchase a home and receive monthly assistance in meeting homeownership expenses. Now, I want to add this caveat. The HCV homeownership program is available only to families admitted to the Housing Choice Voucher Program, and it is not offered by every housing authority. So the vouchers I just talked about, these are vouchers in general, but it's a great idea if you contact your local housing authority to see what vouchers are available, because every voucher that you see that I talked about is not being offered at each housing authority, or they just don't have the funding. Now, I talked about some programs, the federal programs, restricted and unrestricted, and I kind of want to go over the continuum of care, because there are some programs that non-citizens do qualify through the continuum of care. The continuum of care, there are systems in place to address the needs of individuals experiencing homelessness. And one of the largest systems, which is called the continuum of care, works in hand with coordinated entry and the assigned lead agency. So I'm just going to give a brief summary of what the continuum of care is and what funding sources are funded through the COC. The continuum of care, known as the COC, it is a program designed by HUD to coordinate the local homeless services. It is designed to assist and provide services to individuals, including unoccupied youth and families experiencing homelessness with a wraparound service to secure housing. More broadly, the COC program promotes community-wide planning and strategic use of resources to address homelessness and improve coordination. Also, COC is required to establish a coordinated entry system as part of their community-wide planning mandate. So what is a coordinated entry system? So the coordinated entry system, the CES, it is like the arms and legs of the COC. It facilitates the coordination and management of resources and services through that community's crisis response system. The system does cover a specific geographic area. It's accessible and to ensure that all people experiencing a housing crisis have fair and equal access and are quickly identified and assessed, referred, and connected to housing assistance based on their strengths and needs. Again, I'm not going to go into much detail due to time, but I want to give an overview of what the coordinated entry system, and this is kind of like a summary with the coordinated entry core elements. Non-citizens can get access to it by getting assessment. Once they get an assessment, the assessment portion is determined if they qualify for any funding programs through the COC. If they do qualify, they are put on a prioritization list. Each community has a different name, what they call it. Some communities call it by name list. But that list, if they get on that list, they can get pulled off that list and referred out to services. I want to mention this. The coordinated entry process should never be a barrier to accessing services. So that's why it's very important that you contact your coordinated entry lead agency to see how you can get a client screened for services. And that would also include non-citizens. So I'm going to just talk about the largest programs that are funded through the COCs and through the coordinated entry system that non-citizens could possibly qualify for. Again, I want to add this caveat. There are several programs that the COC funds, but for this webinar, I'm just going to focus on rapid rehousing, permanent housing, transitional housing, and homeless prevention. So I'm going to give an overview of these funding programs that non-citizens can get assessed for to see if they qualify. And the first one I want to talk about is the Rapid Rehousing Program. Rapid Rehousing, it does provide short-term rental assistance and services. And the goal of this is to help people obtain housing quickly to increase self-sufficiency. With rapid rehousing, there are no preconditions. That's why it's so important that I emphasize no preconditions. So that's why non-citizens should get screened for rapid rehousing if the funding is available through your coordinated entry. There are no preconditions such as employment, income, absence of a criminal record or sobriety. Again, this is in general about the rapid rehousing program. It typically lasts for 24 months. And after several months of being in this program, the subsidy amount is gradually reduced in increments in a way that supports the individual or family while getting them back on their feet. Another program that a non-citizen could possibly qualify through, if it's available through the COC, is permanent supportive housing. Permanent supportive housing is housing in which housing assistance could be long-term. It can be a long-term leasing or rental assistance, and supportive services are provided to assist households with at least one member, adult or child, with a disability in achieving housing stability. Again, I'm just giving a brief overview of these programs. Again, I highly recommend you contact your coordinated entry system or your continuum of care to get more details about these particular programs in your geographic area. Another program that non-citizens could possibly qualify for is transitional housing. With transitional housing, it does provide temporary housing with supportive services to individuals and families experiencing homelessness with the goal of interim stability and support to successfully move them and maintain permanent housing. With temporary housing projects, it can cover housing costs and accompanying support services for program participants for up to 24 months, depending on funding. And another one COC funded program I want to highlight is the homeless prevention. It does provide short-term or medium-term rental assistance and housing relocation and stabilization services. Now, with homeless prevention funding, it does aim to prevent an individual or family from becoming homeless. Services and assistance, they do vary depending on the funding source in that COC. Some homeless prevention assistance may provide resources for paying application fees, security deposits, or rental arrears, or we call it soft touch case management. Again, I highly recommend you find out who your continuum of care is, find out who your lead agency is to find out what funding sources are coming through your COC, but also how can you get a non-citizen, a client, assessed to see if they qualify for any of these rental assistant programs. Well, this concludes this webinar. I know you probably have a lot of questions. Feel free to email me at lpearl@cwsglobal.org, or you can go on our website and book a TA, and I can go over this information again. All the information covered in this webinar will be provided to you, the links, the support. Again, thank you for allowing me to do this webinar and sharing this information. Again, my name is Lynette Pearl. I'm the Senior Program Officer for Refugee Housing Solutions.
All right. Well, I get the pleasure of having Lynette with us here. She was able to make it for the Q&A time. Thank you so much, Lynette, for being here. And Lynette, so now if you have any questions, please feel free to unmute and ask your question, raise your hand, or submit your question in the chat box.
Joy, I just want to say thank you for being flexible. And guys, thank you for being flexible as well. I am a new grandmama, and ultrasound was today, and I could not miss that. So I got back in time to make sure I provide Joy the support. So thank you guys for the flexibility. So hopefully this training was very helpful. And if you have any questions, I'm here. Thank you.
And we have a question from Dave in the chat. Are you able to see it?
No, ma'am.
All right. Let me see. Let me just make it bigger. All right. It says here, in the opinion of RHS, does the responsibility for exploring the application of these various programs to individual cases belong with the resettlement agency handling the case? Question mark.
Okay, I did not understand is David still logged in? Dave, can you repeat the question? I don't understand it.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Hi. Thank you for the information. In our experience, the local I work for a community-based organization in New Jersey. In our experience, the local resettlement agency doesn't have familiarity or experience with any of the programs you've listed. Their housing experts' task is to talk to landlords and find apartments and then move on to the next case. So in your view, who is expected to learn about these programs, find out their actual availability in the local area, and help clients apply?
Okay, great question. Now I understand it. Dave, I'm coming from a different perspective because I've only been in resettlement for a year and a half. I've been in housing 18 years in different capacities. And from my professional opinion, I recommend that you guys have a housing specialist on staff if you have the manpower and the finances to do that, because that person can be your specialty person. Just for even seeing what's going on with the resettlement, all the newcomers and refugees that are coming in, case managers don't have the time to be specialized in this area. I do highly recommend you hire a housing specialist who are knowledgeable about the different housing programs like public housing, how to apply the housing choice voucher programs. And also I have recommend resettlement agencies work with their COCs, because if you're not at that table, A, you don't know what grants are coming through that COC. And then B, you can't even have voting rights to apply for grants. A couple of months ago, I sent out an announcement, was from HUD. President Biden approved $3.1 billion of funding for continuum of cares. Unfortunately, resettlement agencies can't apply for that funding because guess what? They're not participating with their COC. We just had some trainings with our regional community of practice where I go in more detail about what a COC is and how to participate. But to make a long story short, I feel that you should have a housing specialist, and this person should be abreast on not just the different housing programs, but also following the trends when it comes to housing and what's available.
Could I ask a follow-up?
Oh, absolutely.
The cooperative agreements that resettlement agencies have with ORR have language that they will secure housing that will be affordable on a sustainable basis. That's not happening. I think the case can be made that resettlement agencies are not meeting those requirements. And I wonder your perspective from RHS about that.
Again, I'm new to the resettlement space. I see it from a different perspective. I see that a lot of newcomers and refugees, they are falling into trouble after the 90 days. And that's the reason why I'm recommending that you partner with your COC so those families can have additional support after those 90 days to make sure that they are permanently housed. Again, because I do a lot of TA from resettlement affiliates, and one of the biggest things is families are falling into trouble after the 90 days. So I guess I'm saying it without saying it. That's why it's very important that you provide additional wraparound services for that client. So after the 90 days you exit out, they still have additional support, not just financial support, but also with if they're participating in the COC and they qualify for one of their grant programs, they will also have a case manager. I know I talked about rapid rehousing briefly because not every COC have the rapid rehousing program, but non-citizens can qualify for rapid rehousing. And if they do receive that funding, it does last up to 12 months, depending again on funding availability. And they will receive a case manager that comes in every quarter to actually go over the housing stability plan to make sure they're permanently housed.
Again, I don't want to take the time away from other questions.
Well,
but
Dave, what we can do, you can book a TA session with me. A lot of people do that. They book a TA session and then I can go in more deep and provide you the resources you need. You could go on our website, Refugee Housing Solution website, and book the session, or you can email me and I can send you, but we like to do the booking system because it helps us track our TAs, but I'll be more than welcome to talk to you offline, David, but you have legitimate questions.
Thank you. I'll do that. Could I ask one other broad question that may be of interest to others? I understand there's a fairly new memorandum of understanding between HUD and ORR that's designed to not create new programs or benefits, but to better inform our ORR's network about HUD programs and vice versa, to better inform HUD regional and area offices about refugee situations. I'm wondering your thoughts about that, the potential of that MOU to be helpful.
Well, I do know they're actively working. I know I can't speak for ORR because my grant is on the PRM side, but my counterpart, Joshua, is working directly with ORR. PRM did bring me in because of my housing experience, because that's one of the things they said that was a gap, is making sure that you guys know what programs are currently available that's going through HUD. So PRM is working. That's why I was hired. My representative, Ms. Jennifer with PRM, I'm telling her the gaps I'm seeing in training. That's why I'm providing the trainings, the toolkits. I am in collaboration with Joy to make not just only resettlement affiliates aware, but sponsors and volunteers. That's one thing I am seeing. There is a gap in between you guys knowing what's actually out there when it comes to affordable housing. And I think that they are doing a better job of hiring people with housing specialists that don't come from the resettlement space, like someone such as myself.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, sir.
Good afternoon. I have a question as well for you,
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Leonard. The question in regards of the refugees with disabilities. We do know that we do have a longest list, a waiting list. Let's say in Jacksonville, Florida, we don't even have any more a list for the voucher Section 8. It's been closed on May 31st this year, and they do not accept any more the clients to apply. So in regards of the disabled people, we see that we have several affordable housing programs you mentioned. Is there any way for the people with disabilities to not to be in a line for that long, and maybe they have something special for them where they can skip the line, or we can mention that when applying? Thank you.
Okay, so there's two answers to that. First, if I get it, housing choice vouchers in public housing, there's long waiting list. One thing that I tell people to know what their preference is called a preference. Preference is what housing authorities have. If a client, I'm an example, let me back that up. So if I go to a housing authority and I apply, I want to know what their preference on their waiting list, because as many preferences you can get a client, that's how many points they can get, and they can move up on the list. So one of the things I would recommend, you contact your housing authority to see if there's a preference, which a lot of them do have for people with disabilities. If a person has a proven disability, like from a note from a doctor or receiving SSI, or they can get that preference if the housing authority recognize that preference. There are properties out there specifically for people with disabilities. They call them 811 properties. Again, I try not to use too many housing terminology because I know that's new. Is it Miss Emily?
Yes, ma'am.
If you email me, what we can do, I can send you a report and pull a list, because I can pull lists of properties specifically in your area that do accept applications for people with disabilities.
Thank you so much.
There could be waiting lists, just I'm giving you a heads up, but I'll pull that. And also I can pull you a tax credit property, because a lot of tax credit properties do have preferences with people with disability. That's one of their things on their wait list. And I can pull one for your area.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. By the way, I'm from the Lutheran Social Services, if you're familiar with that organization.
Oh, absolutely.
Perfect. Awesome. Then I will email you. Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, we have one more question here in the chat, and that would be our last question. What is the difference between a citizen and a national?
The classification, a citizen. Now, are you talking about a U.S. citizen or a non-citizen? Because there's two different definitions. A non-citizen, I told in a training. In fact, I don't want to answer that because they just changed the definition again. So I wanted to read up on it. They just changed it about 2 months ago, the classification. Whoever answers that question, can you please email me and I can give you a definite answer, because I do know, I just read they did change classifications of that, and I don't want to give you any old information.
Okay, I just wanted to know, we're welcoming a refugee who will be eligible for being a citizen. And I was wondering what we call her. Is a national? Is she a national until she becomes a citizen?
Yeah, again, they just changed the definition because they're adding more classifications with the surge of newcomers. So please email me and I'll tell you, because I don't want to give you any wrong information. I tried to look it up before this training because I knew there was a couple of things that had changed. But please email me and I'll make sure I'll give you the correct information, because I do not want to give any inaccurate information.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Miss Nancy. And hopefully this was, again, I apologize that it had to be taped, recorded, but things happen. Please, please, please fill out. Joy, you're going to send out a feedback survey. Please fill the survey out, because Joy does give me these results. And even so, email me if there's something that needs to be changed about the training, or if you have suggestions for additional training, please let Joy know. because that helps make me more efficient. And I want to make sure you guys get the correct information you need to be effective in this space.
Thank you so much, Lynette, and thank you everyone who attended today's webinar. And yes, as Lynette said, please take a minute to just scan the QR code on the screen, and that will take you to the feedback. Please do suggest some topics. We are going off the topics that you suggest. So if you have any topics that you want to learn more about, please do put it on the feedback. Let us know how we're doing if you need anything else. And yeah, and again, I will be sharing the recording of today's webinar after the session. And so again, thank you so much for joining today's webinar, and we wish you a great rest of your week.